and I believe that the decision already has been made to do this. I think Latvia will be taken off the map. I think Kiev will be taken off the map. That the German production facilities might be hit as well. But the Russians are done playing games. This war is going to come to a dramatic conclusion sooner rather than later, because now, instead of dealing with the war of attrition, if everybody else wants to step up and play, we can up the game to them as well.
Okay, we are live. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the show. It's your host, Danny Haifong. As you can see, I am joined by former UN Weapons Inspector, U.S. Marine Corps Intelligence Officer, current geopolitical analyst, independent journalist, and friend of the show, Scott Ritter. Scott, good to see you again.
Good to see you. How you doing?
Okay. It's hot out here where we reside, but it's also very hot in the geopolitical sphere. So everybody hit the like button so more people can hear what we are about to dive into. Scott, let's get going with the news that Donald Trump said he is postponing an attack because the Gulf countries, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, told him to do so, and that negotiations are going splendidly. Abbas Araghchi had this to say. He fired back at this, simply citing the recent congressional report. I'm not sure if you have seen it, on the acknowledged losses of dozens of aircraft worth billions, including Iran being confirmed, as Araghchi says here, the first to strike down an F-35. He said, with lessons learned and knowledge we gained, return to war will bring many surprises. And so here's that congressional report. There are reports of about 42 aircraft lost. 24 of those were MQ-9 Reaper drones. And then here's the larger list here, which is for, 37 days of active hostilities about. It's sizable, especially in recent history for the United States. Scott, talk about your reaction to where things are. Donald Trump says negotiations are going much better now that the Gulf countries have essentially, I guess, informed him so. But what's going on for Donald Trump and the U.S. administration when it comes to Iran and in the larger geopolitical picture and foreign policy picture as we head into the long summer?
The long summer. It's the opposite of Game of Thrones. Winter is coming. No, summer is here. A long, hot summer. First of all, again, I just have to start off by saying that trying to do geopolitical analysis when it comes to the Trump administration is a mission impossible using standard analytical techniques, because normally what you do is you take, pieces of fact-based information and you lay them out. It's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, where it's a 1,000-piece puzzle, but they hand you 35 pieces and they say, tell us what it says. And it's sort of an art form. You've got to evaluate the pieces, where they came from, try to figure out where they belong on the board, then step back and try and imagine a bigger picture. Sometimes it's called connecting the dots, trying to put the dots up, connect them to see what you get. I actually developed a reputation as a professional intelligence analyst of being one of the better people in the business at connecting the dots, and had a pretty solid track record. But there's also a time when I had actually had access to real world intelligence on a real time basis. Now you're hampered by a couple things. One, long distance sniping is what I call it. Basically, I'm sitting on my butt at a desk reading information that other people collect. I don't know the accuracy of their sources. I don't know up front what their bias is and all this. So you've got to treat the information you have a little bit circumspect. And then the other thing is, even if I sort through that and I start throwing the dots on the map and start trying to connect them, what's the analytical framework? Because I'm trying to assess Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't exist in my world. Donald Trump exists in an alternative reality where fact-based data isn't necessarily what's running through his head. What's running through his head is the world of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is a malignant narcissist who suffers from narcissistic personality disorder. Now, this is at the point in the conversation where a lot of people go, come on, Scott, you're not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. We were following you up until you said that. You've sort of overstepped the boundaries. I'm going to push back a little bit. In 2019, Scott Ritter, who is not a psychiatrist or psychologist, I don't play one on TV, and I didn't stay at a Motel 6, so I can't claim any indirect expertise. But what I can say is that I was invited to sit on a panel that you guys find it, Google it, 2019. It was a C-SPAN broadcasted, and on that panel were board-certified psychiatrists and psychologists. And basically what they were doing is diagnosing the mental illness of narcissistic personality disorder of a most malignant nature on Donald Trump. I pushed back at the time, not because I was a scientist, but I said, basically it's a common practice that they call the Goldwater rule. Barry Goldwater, presidential candidate in 1964, was diagnosed as being insane by people. In the American body politic, it has been understood that unless somebody is actually sat down in front of a psychiatrist or psychologist, you can't make long distance diagnoses, except when you read the DSM, which is the manual that's used to classify mental illness. Narcissistic personality disorder can be diagnosed long distance. There's 5 things that can be done. The reason why I bring this up is I don't throw this term around loosely. For anybody who's sitting there going, you lost me, pound sand, get the hell out. I don't care. But what I'm telling you is that when you say that Donald Trump is suffers from narcissistic personality disorder, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. He does. Long range diagnosis. Bandy Lee was a board certified psychologist. I think with Yale University, led the study. She's been maligned by people because of the Goldwater rule and others. The vindication of Bandy Lee is real. Everything she said is right. Donald Trump is a mentally ill man, a very sick man. And you see the disease manifest itself. Look at the golden idol that he built to himself in Mar-a-Lago, having religious figures come down and praise him to God. He hasn't read the Bible, apparently, because that's sort of what got the Hebrews in trouble, was building golden idols and worshiping false gods. This guy wants his face on Mount Rushmore. How do I begin to assess a man like this? What parameters do I use? You got to get into the mind of this sick man. And therefore, you have to assess, what does he want more than anything else? He wants Donald Trump to succeed. He wants the legacy of Trump to be solid. He wants to promote Donald Trump. And so that's what you have to see. What is he doing and how does it promote Donald Trump? Not what is he doing, how does it promote the national security of the United States or the interests of the American people? He doesn't care. He only cares about Donald Trump. And so he lives in an artificial reality that can be deconstructed almost immediately. For instance, I stopped at 1 hour before the bombs are supposed to fall. It's a straight up lie. Modern warfare doesn't allow that to happen. Just the complexity of modern warfare. Having planned and helped implement a strategic air campaign against Iraq back in 1990, 1991, I have an idea on how these things work and the complexity of putting together a strike package, what has to be done from an intelligence standpoint, from an operational standpoint, from a planning standpoint, how to bring all those pieces together. It's extraordinarily complex, and you don't stop it with a phone call 1 hour before. So Donald Trump is straight up lying too. He says that the reason why he made this very difficult choice is because he received phone calls from the king from Saudi Arabia. We're assuming MBS himself, from Qatar. We're assuming the emir that has been playing around. We shoot from the United Arab Emirates. They're saying that if you attack Iran, the blowback will be severe. That we will suffer permanent damage to our energy producing, and we don't want that. Okay, but the problem is, you think they made the phone call an hour before or 2 hours before the president chewed on it? These are known statements of fact. These parties have never supported this the resumption of this conflict because they understand full well what the ramifications are going to be. Donald Trump never intended to attack Iran. Well, I'll just make that statement one more time. Donald Trump never intended to attack Iran because we can't attack Iran because we lack the capacity to attack Iran. We can't sustain a meaningful air campaign. And if we did so, we'd only get ourselves in a position worse than where we are today. Donald Trump's trying to dig himself out of a hole of his own creation. But he has to do so with political spin. It's about creating perceptions because perceptions create their own realities. And he lives in an artificial reality. So he needs to create the perception that he is in charge, that he is the decision maker, that the world gravitates around Donald Trump. He is the center of gravity of the entire world, and that his decisions resonate out. And because of him, peace will break out because he made choices. He made decisions. Every decision was made by somebody else. All Donald Trump did is go with the flow because he has no choice. He cannot resume this war against Iran because the consequences of doing so will dig the hole even deeper. He won't get out of it. He can say things like he did today in a press conference, I'm not worried about the midterms. He is worried sick about the midterms. Why? Again, the world of Donald Trump. He's going to be impeached. The Democrats are going to win the House. It is a 100% certainty that if the Democrats win the House, Donald Trump will be impeached. Now, the danger is if he attacks Iran again, the global economy collapses and brings the American economy down, and Donald Trump needs to read history. Maybe somebody will whisper in his ear, it's the economy, stupid, of course, words put by James Carville on a yellow sticker on the war room of Bill Clinton's campaign in 1992, telling Bill Clinton to stop talking about foreign policy and things the American people don't care about. They only care about one thing, and that's the economy, how much money's in their wallet, how much money's in their bank account, and how they're going to be able to pay for Christmas in the coming Christmas season. That's it. If you focus on that, you'll do well. And Donald Trump is forgetting that rule. I mean, he said straight up, I don't care about affordability issues. Well, you know who does care about affordability issues? 99.99% of America. People like me who live paycheck to paycheck, hoping that they're able to pay the mortgage next month, yet wondering how we're going to pay anything when the cost of living through gas prices alone has gone up to more than $450, $500 a month per person. And yet there we are. So Donald Trump right now lives in an artificial reality where he's trying to spin disaster. He's going to have to make a bad deal. A deal that contradicts everything he says he stands for. He's going to have to spin it. He's going to have to become the ultimate snake oil salesman. How do you say no nuclear at all? You have to give it to me and then turn around and cut a deal, which he's going to cut, by the way, where Iran gets to keep enrichment. They might have a 10-year moratorium on it, and the 60% goes to Russia, not the United States. How does he spin that? How does he spin the fact that Iran will continue to control the Strait of Hormuz in perpetuity, that there's nothing we can do to alter that? He can't change that. He's going to have to say, oh, I'm the one that made it happen. I'm the one that allowed the oil to flow. I'm the one that did this and the other thing. But in order to do that, he has to operate from a position of perceived strength. And that's what he's doing right now, threatening to attack and then pulling back, not because he's weak, not because he can't do it, but because he made the conscientious decision that America's not going to attack. I listened to my allies. See, he's casting the blame on his allies already. I listened to my allies. That's what's going on. That's my assessment of it. It's a very difficult assessment to make. As I said, in order to do this, you have to get in the mind of a malignant sociopath, a man who has a mental illness, narcissistic personality disorder. There's no debating this. That's what exists. Everybody knows this. It's just that the mouth-breathing MAGA idiots continue to pretend that he's playing 5D chess when he's really just drooling into a cup.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right in terms of this kind of baiting, switching, threatening, pulling back. It's obvious that he and his administration and the U.S., I guess, in Israeli interests that are pushing war are in trouble. But in terms of the narcissism piece, it's like it also is true that he's just not very good at this as a political figure, because I don't know if you see comments like this, Scott. This is what he said about those American troops, U.S. forces that lost their lives in this war that is extremely unpopular in the United States.
You lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers in these various wars. In two wars, Venezuela, where we lost nobody, and here, we lost 13 people. Now, 13 people is 13 too much, but we lost 13 people. In other wars, you lost hundreds of thousands of people. So people don't like it when you say, oh, do you know you've lost 13? We've lost in two major wars. We took over Venezuela. We essentially took over Iran, and we've lost so far 13 people. Somebody else would have lost 100,000 people. Okay, but I get it.
So he's so good, Scott, that he only lost 13, and anyone else would have lost a lot more. And then this is what he had to say about the comments he's made about the economy, which are even worse in many respects.
Numbers are. You can imagine Democrats in political pundits
The people get it.
jumped all over this
The people
statement
get it,
that you
yeah.
made the other day. You were asked when you were leaving.
What extent are Americans' financial situations motivating you to make a deal?
Not even a little bit. The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about American financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all.
That's right. That's a perfect statement.
So,
I'd
but
make it again.
You can
Because you
imagine
can't-
how many people stop the soundbite
No,
at, I don't think about America's
played that
financial
up.
situation. So what's your response to that
It's
framework?
very simple. When people hear me say it, everybody agrees. Short-term pain. It's going to be short-term pain. But the pain is much less than people thought.
So a bit of tone deafness here. So what's your reaction to all of this? I mean, it seems like there's this inability for the Trump administration to stop what it's doing, and you're right. They're trying to dig themselves out of a hole, but seems like Trump is really keen on digging it deeper, especially in this regard.
You know, when I was in the Marines, I got involved in a situation where I took certain actions that I thought were right, and I ended up in front of a general who was asking me questions, and I was explaining my actions. And I guess I just wasn't getting the message because I kept trying to explain to the general why I was right. And finally, he stopped me. He said, "Lieutenant," I was a lieutenant. He said, "Let me paint the situation here. You're standing in front of a general explaining. You lost. Because when you're explaining, son, you're losing." All right? That was the lesson. You don't want to be explaining. If you've done something and you have to be explaining about it, you lost, especially in the political world. Your actions should be so focused, so tuned, so correct that you don't have to explain anything, that everybody understands implicitly what you're saying, what you're trying to accomplish. That's the world of politics. When you're explaining, you're losing. What's Donald Trump doing right now? He's explaining. Now, he doesn't have a good story. He's spinning. He's spinning. He's trying to, to correct a huge mistake. But when you're explaining, you're losing. Donald Trump is losing. He's lost the American people. I come back to just the basic fundamental thing with Donald Trump needs to have tattooed on his forehead, or actually tattooed on other people's foreheads so he can see it. Because, well, wait, he probably looks in the mirror a lot, so tattoo it so he can read it. It's the economy, stupid. In the moment you downplay the economic side, because you got to understand this. He may be right, even though he's wrong, because he doesn't know anything about Iran's nuclear program. But, he says Iran can't have a nuclear bomb. Well, Donnie, they don't have a nuclear bomb. They don't want a nuclear bomb. They're not developing a nuclear bomb. You've made up the ultimate, straw man. It doesn't exist, and it's not going to exist. To say you don't want it to exist means nothing. It's a meaningless statement. But that's the problem. The average American can't pick up on that. But the average American also doesn't understand anything about nuclear weapons, how they're built, all that. They hear the president say that. Now, normally, if the president said Iran can't have a nuclear bomb, most Americans would go, I agree with that. They're not going to sit there and go, well, Sky Ritter says that they don't have one. They're not going to get into that kind of depth. They're just say, we agree with that. But when you say, I don't care about the consequences for you, for that financial consequences, the problem is when the TV gets turned off, their brain erases the nuclear bomb in Iran, because that doesn't factor into their life on a daily basis. What does factor in is that they're going to go out, the mailman's there, I just did it, and you open up the mailbox and there's a stack of bills. You're going to bring those bills in, and those bills are due. You got to pay them. And you get your paycheck, and you start writing checks, or you do it electronic. However you pay your bills, you pay your bills. And you watch the money from your paycheck, that hard-earned money from a paycheck where you have slaved away at a job, maybe 2 jobs, and you watch that money just go da, 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 da. And at some point, you want that thing to stop so you can sit there and go, okay, with what's left, I can do X, Y, and Z. But instead, nowadays, it's going da, 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 down even more. And it's getting close to that zero line where you suddenly get into where you have more bills and you have money to pay the bills. And then your entire reality is going, you think they give a flying you-know-what about Iran and nuclear weapons at that point in time? And the answer is, hell no, they don't care. All they're knowing is that their bank account is zero, bills are due, and their life is about to come to a roaring end. And the president says he doesn't care. That's why Donald Trump has a political problem, because he is totally out of touch with reality right now. He lives in an artificial world of his own making. And, the American public, it's the economy, stupid. And come November, if he hasn't turned things around, he's going to get swamped. You watch I keep using Game of Thrones because I like Game of Thrones, but you remember that scene where they've looted the Tyrells, and they're coming back, and here comes Dany on her dragon. But before Dany comes, you got the Dothraki and the cavalry running down, and the one guy turns to Jaime Lannister and says, "We're about to get swamped." Yeah, you are, because you don't have enough infantry, and they're going to swamp you. Donald Trump's about to get politically swamped. The Dothraki are roaring down on him. A dragon's coming behind, and he's got a thin line of Lannister infantrymen that aren't going to hold. That's Donald Trump's political reality right now.
Yeah, the narrative game this out a bit about what exactly is the hesitancy about restarting this war with Iran, because we know the Israelis have been the principal. They've been clamoring for this, the principal cheerleaders for this every single day since the ceasefire. The media in Israel has been consistently pushing and pushing and pushing and talking about how escalation. They even said yesterday that escalation preparations are all ready to go, and they're going to, it could be any moment. It's just if, it's when, not if. But the narrative gets really, really strange. I don't know if you saw this piece, Scott, but now you have U.S. officials, these of course always anonymous U.S. officials, planting a story about how the early U.S.-Israeli goal in the war, when the strikes were initiated on February 28th, was to install Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who I know you remember, Scott. A very strange choice nonetheless, if his political history was anything to factor in. But they're saying he was going to be the Delcy Rodriguez of Iran, that he had changed and he was working with the Israelis and the United States, and that the strike that Israel fired at his complex where he lives was meant to rescue him from IRGC and instead hurt him, almost, some say almost killed him, but hurt him, and he hasn't been heard from ever since. Scott, what do you make of this? And maybe you could help game through the reality of why there is so much hesitancy since the beginning of the ceasefire. It seems like there are major forces thirsty, especially on the Israeli side, for the restart of all of this.
With that person, then we'll get to the interesting story of Ahmadinejad. The Israelis have been pushing for a major confrontation with Iran for some time now. And they have been trying to get the United States to participate because the Israelis recognize that they cannot engage Iran militarily by themselves and prevail. They must have the United States on board. On February 11th of this year, Donald Trump met with Benjamin Netanyahu and the head of the Mossad, and they sold him a bill of goods. They sold him on not only the threat of Iran, which Donald Trump has bought into hook, line, and sinker. Go back to the spring of 2018 when Netanyahu came and sold Donald Trump on the concept of a Mossad raid on Tehran. They gained access to a nuclear archive. And then he showed him a bunch of documents to prove the Iranians were lying about the JCPOA and they were pursuing a secret nuclear weapons program. And Donald Trump is so stupid and he's surrounded by so many sycophants that they didn't do the obvious things, such as, hey, at least 3 of these documents that you're presenting us as new in this archive are the same documents that you tried to sell the IAEA back in 2004 and 2009. Which were proven to be forgeries, forged by Israeli intelligence to try and do the same thing, create the perception of Iranian nuclear intent that doesn't exist. But nobody had the courage to tell Donald Trump that, or he was just too stupid to understand that, and Netanyahu got away with it. There is no Iranian nuclear weapons program. Never has been, and isn't going to be one. No matter how much people in your audience and elsewhere say they need to have a weapon. Well, they don't want one. So their need isn't manifested by your desire. They don't want one, and they're not going to build one. But Trump made his decision. Now he was sold on that, but more importantly, he was sold on regime change. That the Iranian regime is about to collapse. The inherent weakness of Vilayat faqih, the supreme, the rule of the supreme jurisprudent, having the supreme leader, the Islamic Republic. He was being sold on the fact that the Iranians are increasingly secular, that this notion of Shia faith doesn't dig deep. The Twelver Shiism is a fanatic religion that exists on the periphery of Iran. It's not part of the fundamental essence of the modern Iranian state. And that if we simply just come in, kill the supreme leader, suppress certain military leadership, we can bring about regime change. And then when regime change happens, we will be able to shut down ballistic missiles, shut down nuclear. In the meantime, we have enough military force to prevent the Iranians from effectively launching missiles. We can suppress until we can get a new regime to eliminate. The Strait of Hormuz isn't a problem. They'll shut it down. We'll reopen it. Again, we'll reopen it. The primary tactic is regime change. Remove the regime. The regime will open up Strait of Hormuz. Everything will be good. Everything hinged on regime change. The Israelis sold the president on this bill of goods. And the president now recognizes that regime change failed and that they didn't accomplish this, that the regime is actually stronger today than ever before. And therefore, all of the other objectives are unattainable. This is the reality. The Israelis sold this to the president, and the president now realizes the Israelis sold him a bill of goods. So where is Israel today? Well, Israel still needs the United States to be involved. Israel is operating under the assumption that it will be able to initiate an action, and through Iranian response, the United States will be dragged back in. That's one of the goals and objectives of this. The problem is the Israelis can't initiate an action without the Americans being complicit in this, because Israel cannot carry out an air campaign against Iran of any significance without close, continuous coordination with U.S. Central Command. And right now, Central Command is shutting that down because we don't want a war with Iran. So where are the Israelis now? Well, first of all, understand that they're getting their asses handed to them in Lebanon. I mean, this is about as embarrassing and humiliating as it gets. Hezbollah is supposed to be defeated, can't continue and sustain the fight, is literally stomping the death out of the IDF. They're beating them on the frontline contact, but now through the introduction of FPV drones, first-person view drones, many of them having fiber optic cable, they're bringing death and destruction 20 to 30 kilometers into the Israeli depth. The Israelis weren't prepared for this. Hint, hint, America. This is your future if you want to go to war against Russia, because you'll not get anywhere. The drones dominate the skies. Israel can't move without dying. And so they're losing Lebanon. Before, the Israelis were saying there could be no, we're going to finish Lebanon. No matter what you want to do with Iran, America, we're finishing Lebanon. It's over. And we played the game. We brought in Barak, who sat down and negotiated with the, it's supposed to be a Israeli-Lebanon negotiation, but Hezbollah wasn't part of it. Hezbollah is the only voice that counts in Lebanon today when it comes to Israel, because they're winning. They defeat Israel. And so you have Hezbollah winning, which isn't supposed to happen, and Israel has no chance of defeating them. We're at the point right now where Israel has to declare defeat. They can't win. They can't prevail. They're getting beat by Hezbollah right now. So that's a big reality. Two, the United States isn't going to play this game anymore. 60% of Americans don't support Israel. And that number is going to get higher and higher and higher. Israel knows. So what did Benjamin Netanyahu do? Benjamin Netanyahu said, in 10 years, we have to cut off our financial ties to the United States. That means the whole enterprise, the whole Thomas Massey, we will outspend you and buy American democracy enterprise is going away, because Israel recognizes that while you may be able to vote out Thomas Massey in the long term, the enterprise is going to collapse. So they need an additional source of funding. Where are they going to get their money? Well, it's not going to come from the inherent economic strength of Israel, which was supposed to happen with the Abrams Accord combined with the India, Middle East, European Economic Corridor. That's not going to happen. None of that's going to happen. So where does Israel get its replacement for American largesse? The answer is the United Arab Emirates. Netanyahu has admitted he traveled to the UAE during the war. Israel has sent troops to the UAE to protect them with air defense. And the UAE has pulled out of OPEC Plus and has gone it on its own to sell maximum amounts of energy on the market to do what? To underwrite the Israeli security architecture that will replace the failed American architecture over the United Arab Emirates. And this vehicle, Israel UAE, will be used to sustain the conflict against Iran. That's their theory. That's their bet. The problem are the Iranians, who have just basically come out and said, we will terminate the UAE's existence as a viable modern nation state on day one if the conflict begins. And it's very easy to do. You shut down energy production, very vulnerable to that. You shut down desalination plant, no water. Right now it's 50, 54 degrees in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. You don't have drinking water, you die. And you shut down power generation, which means no air conditioning. So basically the UAE, which has sold itself as one of the most technologically, societally modern societies in the region, will die. The Iranians say, we'll bring you back to the age of the camel, which is true. If you take out water, you take out energy, they got nothing. And this will happen instantaneously. The Iranians have said that once this starts, they will begin wave after wave every hour firing nonstop missiles and drones against the entire spectrum of targets, inclusive of energy targets and desalination plants in the UAE. It'll go for hour after hour, day after day, week after week, and Iran has the forces to sustain this. America, at best, can continue a conflict on the scope and scale of the 37-day war for a week. Then we run out of everything. We run out of long-range standoff strike weapons. We run out of air defense, and the Iranians will not run out of it. This is the reality. This is why the United States can't attack Iran, because to do so, it's not just a temporary reduction of energy production capacity going to market. It's the permanent elimination of significant quantities of energy going to market, and there's nothing to replace it in the global energy. So you will get a collapse of the global economy. And we're talking about when you cut off this much oil, refineries stop working. When they stop working, they go away. Pipelines cease to function, they go away. The entire infrastructure that the globe needs to survive starts to crash because we can't keep the energy in that the world needs. And you start having these deficits, economies collapse, and it's a spinning, spiraling effect. And we come back then to the United States and the American consumer. It's the economy, stupid. And the president better understand that. And I think he does. This is why he's not going to attack Iran, because to attack Iran is the financial collapse of the region, the world, and the United States. And it's the end of him politically. That's all he cares about. This is a narcissist. He needs, when he finishes his presidency, to be able to say, I was the greatest president that ever walked the face of the earth. And he needs to surround himself with people who will repeat that to him. And he will build monuments to himself and all that. But his presidency is going to end differently. He's going to be impeached, and he's going to be convicted. And he's going to be put on trial. He'll be thrown out of the White House in disgrace. And when that happens, the Democrats will go in for the kill. They will dismantle Trump's industry. They'll find out about all the crimes that are being committed right now. Every crime being committed. Jared Kushner is going to jail. His daughter is going to jail. Steve Witkoff's going to jail. Everybody who has profited from this corrupt enterprise called, the Trump administration will go to jail. The people who are betting, shorting the energy market, going long on the energy market, timing it to the social media accounts of Donald Trump, they will go to jail. There will be a total cleansing of the House. And that's it for the Trump legacy. He was upset with New York when, after he got elected president, you remember driving into Manhattan, you come down to, the Hudson, Henry Hudson, and then it turns into the river, and you look to your left, and they had a whole host of buildings. They all say Trump, 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 Trump. And after he got elected, they all took it down because Trump didn't own a single one of those buildings. He just branded them. He said, put the Trump name up there and people will come. But the problem is he got elected and everybody went, we hate you, Donald Trump. And so they took it down because it was a bad brand. The Trump brand is going to be over, finished, destroyed. He will go to jail. His family will go to jail. And he sees this. This is the writing on the wall. It's inevitable unless he could get a miracle. And the miracle begins with not bombing Iran, not digging the hole deeper.
Yeah, I guess so much for all those that he said short-term pain, but a lot of these LNG companies are looking at short-term maximization of profits, and the scenario you just laid out, that's just going to lay on so many consequences that it'll be interesting to see whether those short-term profits are going to be worth all of the long-term pain that's to come if it continues like this. But Scott, yeah, your comment on the Ahmadinejad story now. It's totally fine. I mean, just leaking that out there, it doesn't really reflect an image of strength. Maybe the New York Times and the U.S. so-called U.S. officials want to do this to weaken Trump's image even further and the U.S. administration's image even further around the war on Iran. But I'm curious on your thoughts about it, because it's a very strange, if it's all made up, it's a very strange story. If there's any truth to it, it's also a strange story. So your thoughts?
No. First of all, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was the president of Iran. He was a very hardline president. Under his presidency, Iran forcefully confronted the policies of the United States and in Europe regarding Iran's nuclear program. He's the one who basically said, "We're not playing by your rules anymore. We're going to do what we want to do," which had nothing to do with acquiring a nuclear weapon, everything to do with expanding Iran's ability to enrich uranium, to master the uranium fuel cycle for nuclear fuel for peaceful purposes. And he caused a lot of angst in the United States and in Israel. Israel interpreted what he was doing as seeking to existentially threaten the existential survival of Israel by possessing, if not a nuclear weapon, the ability to produce a nuclear weapon by mastering enrichment, which means that you've solved the fundamental underlying technical problem of enrichment. He was a very hardliner though, and I forget who replaced him. It was Khamenei, not Khamenei. Khamenei. I don't know. I'm drawing a blank here. But in the election, Ahmadinejad, articulated against this guy who was looking for more moderate policies, and it got to the point where the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, sort of treated Ahmadinejad with root. There's a whole ceremony that goes into transferring power, and the former president plays a role in the current president. And Ahmadinejad was seeking to assert himself, and he was minimized. And many people saw it as a deliberate snub by the supreme leader on the former leader. Ahmadinejad, though, turned out to be a man who, he's not corrupt. He doesn't have secret money. He retired to a very marginal life. He was a former president, and of course, people pay attention to him. But he stayed out of politics. He tried to reinsert himself in the election, got told he can't, and he just began living a very simple life as a gardener and all that. No political ambition. But here's why we come up on this: the regime change failed. The efforts of regime change failed. The story that Rouhani was a replacement, former negotiator. You're right. Thank you for the note. Sometimes reading the chat pays off. Let's give you an example of how the media today works. The Financial Times, English paper, published a story that said that Xi Jinping told Donald Trump that the Chinese felt that Putin was losing the war, and that Putin knew he was going to lose the war, and Putin was this, and Putin was that, and Xi Jinping said he shouldn't have done this, he shouldn't have done that. And the idea was, of course, to create a political problem on the eve of Vladimir Putin's arrival in China. Now, the Chinese came out and said that's horse hockey, and of course it was. But the point is, the Financial Times, and I know this, to give you an example, going back to my time as a weapons inspector, I worked with MI6 on what called a information operation. And the goal was we took intelligence that we couldn't act on because it was crap. We had it in our files, and they said, give us the stuff that's in your file that isn't actionable, meaning you can't do an inspection, and we'll feed it to our sources in the media, and they'll publish it as if it's real to create the impression in the global community that Iraq is developing and pursuing weapons of mass destruction. Operators called mass appeal. Google it, guys. It's real. I know it's real because I was there. But the point is, that's what MI6 does. And as a result, I found out that MI6 owns editors and writers at major newspapers in Great Britain. Any newspapers want to sue me, please do. I love the discovery process because I can name you. We know who you are. And we now know that the guy who published it and the people who published this story are part of that process. This was an act of desperation designed to undermine Vladimir Putin's role, because that's Britain's goal right now. The entire MI6 London station exists to do one thing, and that's to undermine Vladimir Putin. And they're the ones who generated this crap story, planted it in British media, and they ran with it. So now we come to the New York Times. The New York Times has now exposed itself that they are an active front of the CIA. And we always knew that. And it became manifest. You remember last December, at the moment when the CIA was working on a drone program to assassinate Vladimir Putin. Remember the big launch?
Yeah.
Same time they did the launch, there was a story that was published where the CIA said, we're the ones doing this. We're the ones giving them the intelligence. We're the ones who, now it was supposed to be done either after Putin was dead or Putin was weak. It was a CIA power play.
Yeah.
But the point is the New York Times was actively working with the CIA to create this perception. The CIA owns the New York Times. When I was a weapons inspector, again, the CIA worked with CNN to do the same thing, to make a major documentary about the work of the inspectors using intelligence information that the CIA provided. That's what they do. It's an information operation. So this Ahmadinejad story is the cheapest kind of information operation there is. They've gone back. These are people with superficial knowledge of Iran. And they've gone back and they said, oh, he got snubbed. They go with that. He got snubbed by the supreme leader. And he was embarrassed and humiliated. He tried to reinsert himself into politics, and they said no. So we can create the image of a frustrated man, a man who has an axe to grind, a man who can be bought out. And so they've invented this whole story. It's just a total 100% BS story. And the purpose of the story is, of course, to create controversy inside Iran, to start getting. We've done this before. The CIA back in the 1980s got one of the Palestinian liberation groups in Beirut to start killing each other because they planned a story that they had a source, that this guy ratted out this guy, and they turned on each other and they killed each other. So it can work. You can, mental warfare, cause people to clash from within. This is an act of mental warfare. It's designed to inject a premise into Iran's society to create a lot of people continue to support Ahmadinejad. So if the government regime was to arrest him, you create a division. Now, they're not going to arrest him because the Iranians know with 100% certainty this is literally BS. They're just like, do you think the Chinese lost any sleep, opened up the Financial Times going, or the Russians? You think Vladimir Putin went, wait a minute, what? Trump said this to Xi, and Xi didn't call me. I'm not going there. Oh, bullshit. We're going to stop Ukraine. We're going against China. We're going to split up, give the CIA everything they want. He went, no, because they know the truth. The Iranians know the truth. Everybody, this is just the cheapest kind of information warfare. It's an act of absolute desperation. Just like planting the story in the Financial Times. Because again, think of yourself as a Financial Times. You were literally just exposed as an intelligence front. You're no longer a journalistic outlet, and people should seriously cease and desist all subscriptions to the Financial Times. It should ruin them, except it won't, but it should, because they are no longer function as journalists. They are intelligence operatives. The New York Times has now been exposed as a paper that has gone away from journalism. We knew that a long time ago, but it's not just that they're bad journalists. They're intelligence operatives. They're working on behalf of the CIA to carry out regime change plans. And so that's what this is. It's total crap, 100% crap.
And the desperation is incredibly, I think, highlighted here when one thinks that a part of the assessment, if we can call it an intelligence assessment, is that the war that the U.S. and Israel have ignited against Iran that has killed, for example, over 100 children in one strike, the very first day of it, to insinuate that Ahmadinejad betrayed the entire country with that kind of damage, just that one single example. But how about all the rest of it? How about the thousands of people who died before the strikes came, who were killed, and then of course all the infrastructure and people that have been killed by the actual strikes? That must have been something they factored in, like, hey, this will make people very angry if we say he's basically our, but they're insinuating themselves, which is what I think is so interesting. They're saying, okay, well, they're basically saying the U.S. and Israel, have this ace in a hole, which then underscores the actual reason why all of the consequences that have been born from this war have occurred. And it's not a great story to begin with. But any final comments on this before we move on to the Putin-Xi meeting, which you mentioned?
No, I think you pretty much wrapped it up. It's the cheapest kind of propaganda. It underscores two things. The absolute people need to understand that the CIA has no insight into Iran, none whatsoever. In the 1980s, the CIA still had networks that dated back to the time of the Shah, when the CIA was very active in Iran, had recruited just about everybody there was to recruit, and they had some resources still in play. And then a guy named Steve Richter, who was the head of Near East operations, my nemesis when I was doing Iraq. He basically was told we have to start focusing on Iran. And so there was a way they communicated. These guys used old school communications. They would send letters with secret writing to a post box in Munich, where the CIA has a big station. And then that's how they would communicate. But that works if one or two letters are snuck in every week, part of an overall flow of mail. Nothing stands out. But then Richter said, we got to double the reporting, triple the reporting, set the word out. We need more reports. But he didn't change the method of communication. And so suddenly, out of nowhere, all these agents are starting to send secret writing in post to Munich. And the Iranians are going, huh? And counterintelligence guys went, well, we're on to something here, floated back, and they terminated the entire network. All gone. Vast majority went up hung by the neck because they betrayed their country. They're dead. The CIA attempted to reconstitute that. And once again, they had a system in place, and the CIA had a method of communication that involved Gmail. I won't get into the specifics, but the bottom line is you use a Gmail address and all this kind of stuff. And again, the Iranians were able to break that and reverse engineer it, and they rolled up that network, all gone, finished, dead. They shared it with the Russians and the Chinese. The Chinese were able to go in and clean up all the CIA's networks in China, and the Russians, I think, the CIA was able to dismantle what they did, and the Russians didn't quite get as far along as they wanted to. But the point is, we have no human resources inside Iran. So what happened at this time? It's a high-profile target. Give you an example. The NSA built something called Stuxnet, which is a virus that was supposed to go in and infect the Iranian nuclear enrichment program, their centrifuges. And it did it going through controllers, Siemens controllers, et cetera. The Israelis cooperated. Now, to get it into Iran, though, we don't have any human intelligence. We don't have any ability. So we had to turn to the Israelis. The Israelis have a whole bunch of human intelligence inside Iran because the Israelis are patient. They're long-term. They don't do stupid things like make them double up their reporting using secret writing on postal or use a Gmail account that doesn't work. And so we basically transferred the human intelligence aspect to Israel. We would provide operational oversight. We would provide conceptual work, but the Israelis would execute. Assassinations, we played a heavy role in that, but the Israelis executed. Stuxnet, it was the Israelis that broke through the air gap to get the virus into the system. And so we became hostage to Israeli control of the human intelligence aspects of Iran. So what I'm bringing it up is that we don't have any special insight in Iran. Everything comes from Israel. And Israel has lost it. They burned through a whole bunch of resources this past December and January. They burned through those resources. A little premature action exposed the Iranian shutdown, very effective. So there's very little human intelligence operations coming out of Iran. The other problem is human intelligence. Okay, so let's say you have a good operator, but it has to come back to an analytical framework. In order to have a sound analytical framework, you need to have people who are up to speed on the reality of Iran. Generally speaking, that means you travel to Iran, you know the Iranians work in Iran, you have this insight. CIA doesn't do any of that. Instead, the CIA recruits in their analytical, same way they do with Russia, people who go to college and universities and they get a degree in Iran hatred. It's like, how do you want to work for the CIA? Let me give you go to a big name university with a Russian studies program and write a thesis on Vladimir Putin being the worst man in the world. And you'll be hired by the CIA because you're thinking right, you're aligned right. But you don't know anything because you've never been to Russia. You may not even speak Russian, but you're going to be hired because you hate Vladimir Putin, therefore you're in. If you go to an academic institute and you say, I hate the regime, the theocracy is bad, is evil, etc., you will be hired by the CIA to run analysis. But your analysis is already openly biased. And the problem is you have politicians who are putting down policy options based upon that bias, and you're reinforcing that bias. And that's where the CIA is today. They don't have Iranian experts. They don't have any insight into what's going on in Iran. They don't know how to interpret what's going on. And that's why they've gotten everything wrong about Iran. Everything wrong. They've got nothing right about it. This is another reason why the Ahmadinejad thing is stupid, because if you're at least going to come up with it, you got to be a little bit smarter than that. And they're not. And the last thing too is, let's just say this is right. You know what the New York Times just did? Let's just say that everything is true. They just outed a major Israeli human intelligence operation.
Right.
And if it was real, then scores of intelligence assets are going to be caught and executed. Now, fortunately, it's not real and all that. But if it was real, understand what the New York Times just did. They outed an intelligence network that would result in dead people.
Yeah. Scott, maybe in the last portion of time here, we could talk about the Putin visit to China to meet with Xi Jinping. And it comes, of course, not a week after, just days after Donald Trump came and left Beijing himself. One of the key striking parts about this is rather than the theatrics, it's more of the concrete character of what actually happened at this meeting. 40 documents were signed and they were shown here, by China and those organizing the summit. So huge. And then, of course, there were lots of interesting goodwill gestures like this 26 years ago when the Treaty of Good Neighborliness was signed between China and Russia. Putin met this family and he eventually became an engineer. He studied in Russia, and Putin met him again on this anniversary of that treaty. So good name, goodwill gestures, less theater, but very concrete documents signed across all sectors of trade and cooperation. Talk about what the significance is, and then maybe if you wanted to do some comparing and contrasting of the two visits, your thoughts on this.
Well, first of all, let's set the trip up by looking at the Trump trip, which accomplished nothing. You talk about 40 agreements. Trump talked about 200 Boeing aircraft contract that doesn't exist. Boeing's still waiting for the Chinese to call, and they're not going to call. So nothing happened here. This was Donald Trump thought he was going to come in and try to strong arm China into doing things, accepting things. It didn't work that way. The Chinese were very polite, but nothing happened here except the outright humiliation of the president, not because of anything China did, but because of what the president did himself. I mean, Sergei Lavrov has said that the United States is agreement incapable. Well, the president proved that by when Xi Jinping left and left his folder there, the president reached over, opened it up, leafed through it. Now, people can laugh that off. Don't. That was hugely insulting. Hugely insulting. It shows that the American president has no integrity whatsoever. It's not his job to spy. He's the president of the United States. He should already know what's in that binder if the CIA was doing its job, but the CIA isn't doing this job. So therefore, that's another exposure of the failure of American intelligence. The president feels a need to find out what Xi Jinping's thinking because he wasn't properly briefed. But he wasn't properly briefed not only because the intelligence community doesn't know, but because he doesn't want anybody telling him. Donald Trump has to be the man that knows more than anybody else in the world about everything. So therefore, he knows nothing. It was a total failure, this trip. He was told by Xi Jinping something very important about Taiwan, and this is why it relates to Russia. Basically, he was told that Taiwan is of existential importance to China. China will not tolerate any aspect of any policy that seeks to create a divide between Taiwan and China, and that anybody who seeks to do so, there will be conflict, war. And so China put the United States on notice that if they continue to pursue the policies they're pursuing, there will be a war between China and the United States because Taiwan is of existential importance. Now, why is this important? This was done very publicly by Xi Jinping. Vladimir Putin is getting ready to visit. You want the best indirect communication possible? Define a scenario that says Taiwan is of existential importance, that China is willing to go to war to defend that. You have Putin coming in, getting ready to expand a conflict dramatically against Ukraine and Europe. And I believe we're going to be seeing a major military strike against at least Latvia and maybe Germany and other countries. That's just the way it's going to be. But Putin doesn't have to come in and ask permission or say this. Xi Jinping just told him, we believe that Ukraine is to you what Taiwan is to us. and we're willing to go to war to defend our interests in Taiwan, and therefore we will accept whatever you have to do to defend your interests in Ukraine, up to and including conflict with Europe. That's the signal. And then they back it up by sitting down and not distancing themselves or going to patient, by signing meaningful agreements, strategic energy agreements. I mean, how does the United States have any leverage? What the leverage Trump wanted was to say, I control Venezuelan oil, I control Iranian oil, therefore I control 23% of your energy market. And if you don't do what I want to do, I'll strangle you to death. That's why Xi Jinping looked at Stephen Miller, the long handshake and the stern look, and basically saying, we're on to you. How's it feel to be you right now? Not very good, does it? Because everything you thought you were going to get, you didn't get. Marco Rubio was there. He had sanctions placed on him, but my understanding is that the Chinese let him in not by lifting sanctions, but just by renaming him. And we weren't smart enough to pick up on the significance, because the name basically meant you're a loser. That's what literally. They stopped calling him Rubio. I think they call Lubio, and it means, when you break it down, you're a man who's an absolute loser. You're disgusting. You're no good. And Rubio never even picked up on that. He just did what he went there and was humiliated, because all the policies he's been promulgating have turned out to be empty, shallow, ineffective. The same thing with Scott Bessent. His goal to bring Iran to China through its knees by denying it energy, undone. And one of the ways it was undone, not just by Iran's continued survival, but the energy agreement with Russia. Now, Russia, the Trans-Siberian 2 pipeline is alive and well and living. We're looking at, agreements of unprecedented labor, or unprecedented scope and scale. Russia and China are not just neighbors, they're good neighbors with strategic interests that are mutually beneficial and in direct opposition to the strategic goals and objectives of the United States under Donald Trump. That's the significance of this meeting. There are people in the United States who apparently have read Henry Kissinger's works and believe that they can replicate his effort to divide China from the Soviet Union. That isn't going to work. The United States isolated itself by not having any policies, having nothing to contribute, and showing that they are agreement incapable, and showing the inherent dishonesty and lack of integrity of the President of the United States. And they replaced it with a man who gets along with Xi Jinping famously. I mean, you remember the scene where Trump is in the garden. He turns to Xi Jinping. He goes, "You've never brought anybody here before." I mean, it's like a lover turning, you didn't bring your wife here, but you brought me. Well, it turns out he brought a lot of people there, including Putin. But it doesn't matter. That's Trump's insecurity. Now, imagine how he felt now when Xi Jinping brings Putin down, brings up, and there's a giant portrait of the two of them together, smiling friends. There was no Donald Trump portrait, so Donald Trump knows that he's the outcast. He runs around pretending he has a special relationship with Xi Jinping. He doesn't. He doesn't. Vladimir Putin does. And that's the big takeaway.
Yeah. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, Xi Jinping and Putin are signing agreements. They sign literal documents that are binding and that will strengthen the relationship. Donald Trump went in and didn't get a damn document. There was no document signed. We would have known about that. And as exactly as you said, whatever has been verbally agreed upon is all contingent upon the relationship between the U.S. and China, which we know is on rocky ground, in large part because of a decade or so of U.S. policy that's gotten only more aggressive, which Trump played a big role in. So unless we think the Chinese are stupid and China is stupid, this was all professionally and intentionally done and went the way it was supposed to go. Scott, any final comments before we head out of here? Anything that we didn't hit on? Please, you take it away.
Well, I mean, I'm always hesitant to do predictive analysis in this day and age, especially when it deals with any policies that the United States is involved in. But I would say that I think we're going to see the Ukraine issue come to a head dramatically very soon. I think Vladimir Putin just signed off on what he called long-range sanction plan for June, and he said that basically that Ukraine is going to double down on stupid and expand the drone campaign against Russia. The St. Petersburg International Economic Forum begins on June 3rd. I'm going to be there. I'm appearing in a panel on June 4th talking about the future of diplomacy and international relations. I think my report card will be bleak. But yeah, the point is, this is one of the, if it's the largest forum of its kind. It swamps Davos in terms of size, scope, scale. Davos gets hyped up in the Western media by a bunch of speeches, but this one is where actual contracts are signed, business is done, tens of thousands of people show up. It's the most influential forum of this kind. It's just a shame that the United States locks itself out because of Russophobic policies. But if you think for a second that this flagship of Russian economic development is going to be threatened by Ukrainian drones, think again. On Victory Day, May 9th, Russia made it clear that if Ukraine attacked Moscow during the parade, that Kiev, downtown Kiev, Bankova, the administrative sector, would disappear. I believe that that's still on board. And if Ukraine expands these attacks, Kiev will disappear. But it now is apparent that the Baltic states, in addition to providing a corridor through which Ukrainian drones can be launched against St. Petersburg and the environs there, Latvia is providing actual bases so that the drones can be launched closer, and the reaction time is greater. This is a direct threat. Look at the map. Understand that Vladimir Putin normally comes to St. Petersburg International Forum, speaks on the last day, holds a very famous, open mic thing where he takes questions on a panel. You think the Russian president's going to go there and say, please attack me, please kill me, please try and do what you want to do? So I think that Latvia will literally be struck very hard. It's a question about whether or not the extension goes into Germany. There's every reason to believe if certain kind of drones are used, FP5 Flamingos, for instance, that the German production facilities might be hit as well. But the Russians are done playing games. This war is going to come to a dramatic conclusion sooner rather than later, because now, instead of dealing with the war of attrition at the grassroots level, which Russia is winning, by the way, dramatically. Don't believe me. Just look at the Special Inspector General report issued on Operation Atlantic Resolve, I think they call it. And you'll see that Russia is dominating the entire war. For the first time, the truth is being told. All those other pro-Ukrainian social media sites out there saying the opposite. They're just throwing crap at you. The facts don't back up anything they say. But Russia, normally when they talk about attrition warfare, they don't attach a calendar date to it. They just say that we're going to go as long as it needs to go to get the objectives. But now, because of the long-range sanctions that Ukraine is doing, these drone attacks, this is an existential problem for Russia that has to be resolved sooner rather than later. And I believe that the decision has already been made to do this. I think Latvia will be taken off the map. I think Kiev will be taken off the map. And I think Russia will basically say, if everybody else wants to step up and play, we can up the game to them as well.
Yeah, we didn't get to talk deeply about Ukraine this time around, but the actions continue to push Russia in this direction. So, Scott, thank you so much for the analysis. We're going to head out together. I want to make sure everyone knows that your website is in the video description below. So that's where people can support you and all of your work. So go there after the show. Hit the like button as you do that. That helps keep boosting the show. And all the places to support this program, too, are in the video description. I'm on with Sharmeen Narwani tomorrow, 12 noon Eastern time. So do come through for another program. Until next time, Scott, any last words?
No, again, I appreciate all the support. Like I said, I'm going to Russia end of this month and have an extensive program involved. I was just invited to go to Ufa, which is the capital of Bashkiria, the Bashkir Republic. People might not know, but my background is a Russian area studies kind of person. I've specialized in certain aspects of Bashkir history. Zeki Valeti Togan is a guy I follow. So this is a thrilling thing. But the point is, to go to Russia, I gain access to Russian information, the reality of Russia, bring it back and try to create antidotes to the disease of Russophobia so that we can deal with Russia more responsibly. It only happens with your support. So anybody who wants to support this trip and other trips, kindly go to scottritter.com, to my Telegram page, go to the site that says donate, and whatever you donate, it all adds up. But I'm a totally 100% self-funded independent journalist. I'm not Putin's puppet. I'm not on the Russian payroll, and won't be. This is why you can, I may make mistakes, but any mistakes that are made are mine, not because somebody tried to influence me or do anything like that. And I strive to be as mistake-free as possible when I go to Russia and report on these issues. So I appreciate the support that people have provided, and any support that anybody wants to provide going forward will be greatly appreciated.
All right, everybody, you heard him. we're heading out of here. Thanks to everyone who gave a super chat. I just put you all up, all the moderators, and of course, everyone who viewed. Hit the like button before you go. Check out Scott's work, and I'll see you tomorrow at 12 noon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.